Thanks for joining us on Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. The Africa Union Summit holds this week in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa, and President Muhammadu Buhari is attending. Theme of this summit is silencing the guns, creating conducive conditions for Africa's development. A very appropriate theme considering that just a few weeks ago, leaders were in London for the first ever UK-Africa Investment Summit. It appears that once again, Africa is the new bride, as even in the week gone by, the Nigeria-Australia Investment Forum held in Melbourne, Australia. The aim was to bring together government officials, organized private sector executives, and other stakeholders in agriculture, aviation, transport, health, housing, and ICT to discuss bilateral issues of mutual benefit. There could be more in the offing, we hope. Britain is still assuring Nigeria of those close ties. The Earl of Essex, Prince Edward, was in Nigeria during the week, meeting with top business and creative executives and eulogizing those who promote the strong Nigeria spirit. Take a listen.
I think what comes across is that fantastic energy and life and dimension that Africa and particularly Nigeria brings to that, and some great stories. It is that language, it is that ability to communicate across cultures and across borders, which is what this business is all about.
A busy week it has been in the world of diplomacy, but this week we'll be discussing the impact and lessons from U.S. President Donald Trump's impeachment trial and how it could have impacted the rest of the world. My guest is a foreign affairs analyst living in the U.S., Ms. Joanna LeBlanc. Plus, the conclusion of my interview with the UAE ambassador to Nigeria, Dr. Fahad Al-Tafaq, in which he discusses issues surrounding the Middle East. All that coming up after a quick check of those diplomatic headlines.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has met with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on the sidelines of the 33rd African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. He said he appreciated the friendly relations between the two Commonwealth countries, noting that Canada is a destination of choice for higher education by Nigerian students. President Buhari also commended the renewed vigor by member countries of the Economic Community of West African States to mobilize their own resources to combat terrorism. Meanwhile, Mr. Gutierrez has commended China's efforts at battling the new coronavirus. He made the comments on the sidelines of the African Union Summit holding in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, on Saturday. He, however, called on the international community to strengthen solidarity and cooperation, while also stressing that the international community should respect human rights and not stigmatize people amid the pneumonia outbreak.
I think it's important also to say that we need to avoid the stigmatization that can sometimes accompany a situation like this, in which all of a sudden people that have nothing to do with it are stigmatized for any reason. So I think it's important to keep a very strong human rights perspective in the way the international community deals with the coronavirus.
The U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, has warned Israel not to declare sovereignty over the West Bank without Washington's consent, pushing back against calls for immediate action by ultra-nationalists within Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition. U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan, unveiled on January the 28th, envisages Israel keeping key swathes of the occupied territory where Palestinians seek statehood. Netanyahu initially pledged a speedy application of Israeli law, de facto annexation to Jewish settlement blocks and the Jordan Valley, to lighten his religious writers' base ahead of Israel's March 2nd election, where he hopes to win a fifth term. But he was forced to backpedal after the White House made it clear that it wanted a U.S.-Israeli mapping process, likely to take weeks or more, completed first.
The president got up and he made a speech, and he said there will be a committee, and the committee will go through a process. The process will not last very long, but we want to go through a process. The politics seem to be emerging that people are saying, who cares about the process? Let's go do what we want. I can't stop that. I'm not suggesting that the government of Israel shouldn't do whatever it wants to do, but I think people should know that if the president's position is simply ignored, then we're not going to be in a position to go forward.
Finally, Turkey has sent major reinforcements to Syria's northwestern Idlib region as Ankara tries to halt rapid advances by Syrian government forces. According to a senior official, all options are on the table, adding that 300 vehicles entered Idlib on Saturday, bringing the total to around 1,000 this month. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says 1,240 Turkish military vehicles crossed into Idlib in the last week, along with 5,000 soldiers. The government offensive in Idlib, the last major enclave of opposition to President Bashar al-Assad, has driven more than 500,000 people from their homes towards the closed Turkish border, threatening a new humanitarian crisis in Syria.
Welcome back. Our focus now is on the United States. Days after President Donald Trump was acquitted during the Senate impeachment trial and as Democrats prepare for the New Hampshire caucus. President Trump was acquitted along party lines on 2 articles of impeachment approved by the Democratic-led House of Representatives on December 18th, with the votes falling far short of the 2/3 majority required in the 100-seat Senate to remove him under the U.S. Constitution. The Senate voted 52 to 48 to acquit President Trump of abuse of power, stemming from his request that Ukraine investigate political rival Joe Biden, a contender for the Democratic nomination to face Mr. Trump in the November 3rd election. And while no Democrat voted to acquit President Trump, only one Republican senator joined the Democrats in voting to convict, and that was Mitt Romney. The Senate also voted 53 to 47 to acquit President Trump of obstruction of Congress by blocking witnesses and documents sought by the House. Had the vote gone through, Vice President Mike Pence would have been elevated into the presidency. No Democrats voted to acquit President Trump. This will be the 3rd time a U.S. president would be facing impeachment and removal from office, and the 2nd to not be removed despite being impeached. What are we learning from how democracy is practiced in the U.S. and the rule of law? Let's bring in international affairs analyst Joanna LeBlanc. Ms. LeBlanc, thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me, Amarachi. I appreciate it.
So there was no surprise about President Trump's acquittal, but what are some of the takeaways from the trial you think may have been important to foreign governments watching?
Well, like you said earlier, Mitt Romney took an unprecedented decision to not convict the President of the United States on the article of abuse of power in his role. And some have praised Mitt Romney for this position that he has taken. And there has also been some backlash. But what I can tell you is that regardless of your political posture or your political position, you have to admit that it took a whole lot of courage for Mitt Romney to have done what he did. Some have called for his removal from the Republican Party. And President Trump has also attacked him and on Twitter, indicating that the reason he took such position is because he is bitter about the 2016 election, where he ran for the presidency as well, and he ultimately did not win the nomination. But again, I think that leaders across the nation can learn something from what Mitt Romney did, and it just tells you that you can be strong, you can be bold, in spite of the backlash, in spite of the repercussions that may exist as a result of your decision. But when you are the voice of the people, when you've been elected by the people to carry out a particular mandate, you must be fair. You must do what is right by the people of your respective country or respective state, not only based on interest and relationships.
What about the mere fact that the leader of the free world was on an impeachment trial? The possibility that he could have lost his job entirely?
Yes, the reality is that this impeachment trial or proceedings, however you want to look at it, will definitely stain the legacy of President Donald Trump. However, the polls show that on the day that Senate decided to acquit the president, his approval ratings went up significantly. So even with this stain on his legacy, people are still supporting him. People are supporting him. His base still feels as though he is governing the country appropriately, and that he is again making America great again. But another thing I want us to look at is that if he was convicted by the Senate, Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, would have been the president of the United States. Some have argued that he is even more dangerous than the current commander in chief. So I think that it is critical for people to take note of that.
Yeah, and for allies and partners of the U.S. Who were watching the trial, I'm sure a lot were probably not hoping anything would change. I mean, it had been predicted that the senators, the Republican senators, would help President Trump get off, this trial eventually. And they sort of like helped to wrap things up as quickly as possible. But for a leader like that, how did this impact on America's allies and partners still, those who still see the U.S. as the beacon of hope, the carrier of the torch, of democracy for the rest of the world? Does America still pose, that sort of example?
What I can tell you is that this impeachment trial, it shows the rest of the world that even though the president ultimately was not found guilty and was acquitted, it shows that no one is above the law. Because the fact of the matter is, in most countries around the world, the idea of a president being impeached is almost impossible.
Okay. But this is a president who has imposed visa bans recently on a country like Nigeria, whom the U.S. claims to be a real close trading and bilateral partner. He has also called off trade treaties and pulled America out of a nuclear and a climate deal. Are all these characteristics of making America great again, do you think?
I'm not sure if the president's visa ban is making America great again, but what I can tell you is that it definitely undermines the economy of America, and here is why. The United States Census reported that there are over 400,000 persons of Nigerian ancestry who live in the United States, and also the median income for persons of Nigerian ancestry in the United States is over 68,000 US dollars, in comparison with $61,000 for the rest of the country. In addition to that, Nigerians are more likely to be educated. In fact, Nigerian immigrants are some of the most educated immigrants in the United States of America. So those numbers tell you that Nigerians definitely serve a role in the development of this country. Persons of Nigerian ancestry has utilized their ingenuity to help move this country forward. So by limiting their ability to enter into the country, severely undermines American economy. But I do hope that the American leadership, not the American leadership, the Nigerian leadership, President Buhari, folks in the National Assembly, are listening and they're taking note. Because if Nigerians are able to come to the United States, a foreign land, and thrive and succeed in some areas more than an average American, Nigerians can certainly do the same thing in Nigeria if only the structures were better, if only there were less corruption, if only our institutions in Nigeria were stronger. Nigerians can definitely pursue life, liberty, and happiness in Nigeria, because when they go abroad, we have the numbers in the UK, in the United States, they excel.
And we'll leave it at that, Joanna. Thanks again for joining us on Diplomatic Channel, Mr. LeBlanc.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, we'll have more on my interview with the UAE ambassador to Nigeria, Dr. Fahad Al-Tafak. Stay with us.